everyone, and welcome to this talk on regenerative ranching in the US. My name's Phoebe Weston. I'm a biodiversity journalist at The Guardian, and I write on the Age of Extinction project, which is all about biodiversity loss and ways we can tackle it. I'm really pleased to introduce our guests today because I think they provide an interesting bridge between livestock farming and conservation, which have a famously difficult relationship, certainly in the UK. I've really enjoyed the talks that we've had so far at the conference because they've dealt with exactly that issue. So we're going to look at the ecological benefits of regenerative farming and also how farmers could be supported in making that transition. The regenerative farmers we're talking to have already had a massive impact in the UK in some areas, such as mob grazing and the grass-fed movement. So it'd be great to hear a bit more about those principles and also what farmers in the UK can learn from their US counterparts, given how much less land we have here. We're going to be starting on the West Coast with Doniga Markegard, who's a wildlife tracker and regenerative farmer managing 10,000 acres of coastal grassland in Half Moon Bay in California. Her family appeared on the documentary Kiss the Ground, which is on Netflix, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Then we're going to move over to the East Coast. We're going to be speaking to Will Harris, who works on White Oak Pastures farm in Bluffton in Georgia. In 2000, the Harris farm was a conventional cattle run farm with high levels of pesticides, fertilizers, and antibiotics. And now it's a mixed farming system with cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens. It's a very interesting experiment in the deindustrialization of agriculture. And not only have they massively influenced UK farmers, but they're groundbreaking in the US too. When I was looking into Will's farm, I read about an article in the New York Times about Will, which said, if the Southern organic crowd were made up of teenage fangirls, he would be their Justin Bieber. So that should give you an idea of quite how groundbreaking his work has been. So Doniga and Will are going to do 15-minute presentations each, and then there's going to hopefully be plenty of time for questions. If you put them in the Ask a Question thread on the webinar, and then after 1 hour, if we have questions we haven't got through, we're going to break out into a Zoom chat, which I think lasts for half an hour. There's going to be a link to that in the thread once the hour's up. So just click on the link and it will take you through to the Zoom chat. So let's start things off with Doniga.
California prairie grasslands, which was once stewarded by the people, and the incredible carbon bank of grasslands that we're dealing with. I am humbled by the way that these were stewarded in years past by those indigenous people. So regenerative agriculture mimics nature. And my background is in wildlife tracking, as Phoebe mentioned. And so I followed tracks. This is me. Pause it, go back. Okay. I followed tracks, nature functions and wholes and patterns to learn the cycles of nature. So my specialty is tracking large predators. I was just the other night able to witness these tracks here are mountain lion, and so I was able to witness a mountain lion and her two kittens as they were on a kill site. So that's what really drives me, is tracking these predators and seeing how they influence everything around them. And that's me as in my youth wilderness tracking wolves. And that's really how I learned regenerative agriculture, is from the wolves and from the wildlife, because they're impacting everything. So the predators move the plants move the soil, more diversity comes as a result. And you can't have life without that death. And this here is an elk carcass that I came across when I was out alone tracking a pack of 11 wolves. And yeah, it really lesson that day, because the meadow that the wolves had made their rendezvous site was full of life, and that form of insects and diverse plants and songbirds and beavers. And without that disturbance of those herds of animals, there would not be that much life. So as a regenerative farmer, we move. So movement is our big theme. And where we're not exactly playing that role of predator, but predators move the prey, and we as regenerative farmers move the animals. And what that results in is more biodiversity. So our primary symbiotic relationship is then we can mimic the function of those animals on the landscape. So the grassland type that we work in, California's coastal terrace prairies, hold more plant species per square meter than any other grassland type in North America. And we've documented 157 species of plants just on one ranch. And that's without planting a seed. So it's really key to look at these studies because you can see when you don't have cattle grazing, there's only a handful of species that are dominant, and the animals actually bring about this relationship, which then creates those conditions for that diversity to thrive. Is pastured poultry. After the cattle or sheep come in, the chickens will come in and graze. We move them every single day. We graze grass-fed sheep. This is our Greg, that she was the only first grader. I'm a firm believer in is to utilize animals to grow your vegetables. And in order to have a regenerative vegetable system, you need to incorporate animals. So this is on a nearby farm, sells direct to farmers markets across the California Bay Area, Blue House Farm. And we bring in our sheep to fertilize and to do what they do best, to mow, to mulch, to mob together. And it's great for the farmer because he makes less on his tractor, and his soil is, vegetables are more. So the opposite of movement is stagnation, and stagnation leads to oxidation and desertification. You know, nature wants to move. Nature abhors stagnation. Nature abhors a monoculture. Stagnation leads to monocultures in nature. So if we let things just go back to the way they were, that isn't responsible human behavior. We need to figure out how to tend to the wild, because what we see works in open space when humans just put a fence around it, and then stagnation is created, and that leads to that oxidation. As farmers, and then the animals move the plant. And these plants then will move the soil. So this is a species land. It's a native perennial bunch grass, Danthonia californica, and basically our family out on horseback, moving these herds of animals into pasture to allow that pasture that they came from recover. So you can see those roots. I mean, that's the real agriculture tool right there, is those root systems and how they interact with all the other roots, all the mycelium, and the whole network underground. So regenerative agriculture leaves soil full of life and water. It holds in water. And what we're seeing from our soil results is that our shallow carbon is increasing by 3% and our deep carbon is increasing by 7%. Now, this fluctuates a little bit year by year, but overall, we're seeing massive amounts of carbon being sequestered in these rangeland soils. And here's some of the data. So the area outlined in blue is the area that we graze. The area outlined in orange is the area that's the cattle have been removed and it's sort of let to go back to nature. The area outlined in green is an area that's conventionally grazed. So if you were to study this map, you'd see that the green circles and the blue circles represent net gain in soil carbon. So that's where that data comes from. And then you look at it's an average of 0.5 tons of carbon per acre per year. And we're really just scratching the surface of the potential for this. And it's all about movement. It's all about mimicking nature and moving those animals and observing, having a keen eye for how nature functions, how grasses grow, how grasses really flourish to be able to pull down that carbon through photosynthesis and transfer that into the soil. And this is a result of when we don't tend the wild, right? We've lived through horrific wildfires here in California. And this is one, I mean, this is on the Pacific coast, on a ranch just north of here in Sonoma County, which should be lush, incredible grassland, yet we're seeing these horrific wildfires. So we need to get into right relationship with the land because our survival really does depend on it. And just 2 weeks of those devastating fires is equivalent to a whole year of all of the cars and all of the trucks, all of the transportation emissions in California for an entire year. Just 2 weeks of the pollution caused and the carbon emitted from these fires. This is a ranch that we graze at the mouth of the Russian River in Jenner. And so we can look at these, what regenerative agriculture does and how this can lead us towards being in that right relationship and helping to prevent these out of control wildfires and other catastrophic events. So we aim for green living plants. Did my internet? Is my
Hi, everyone. I think Doniga's internet has just gone down. Okay. Oh, you're back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. Did you get... Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, we will try this again. Okay, hopefully you didn't miss too much. Okay, so green living plants 365 days a year. Okay, minimal tillage, keeping the soil covered. Diversity above and below ground. Aim for healthy soil. No chemicals. Integration of animals. And this is what it looks like. That's our family on horseback, being in touch with nature, being out in the wild, connecting with place. And the image above is an image of a Silicon Valley based lab meat factory. So when you think about it, how would you like your children to grow up? What would you like them to aspire towards? Being in touch with their surroundings, learning where the true source of their food comes from, or being in a factory setting with food that really can't be called food. And so when we look at where the majority of food is being produced, it is from those smallholder farmers. 70% of the world's food is being produced by smallholder farmers, while they're using only 20% of the resources, where 80% of the resources are being used in industrial agriculture while producing only 30% of the food. So, and we really want to think about bringing in that indigenous knowledge of place as well, because that's where, as a regenerative movement, we need to look towards, because we want biodiversity. Biodiversity is key. And where is the world's biodiversity? 80% of the world's biodiversity is held on 22% of the land on this earth. And that is all indigenous held territories, where indigenous people are continuing to steward that land. So what can you do anywhere, whether it's in the city, in your apartment, anywhere? Well, you can build your personal soil to help draw down carbon. And this can be from a backyard garden, from a planter box, anything. You can purchase from soil savvy farmers. Adventure to the source of your food to engage with the stewards of the land. This picture is in Montana at a group of women ranchers who are stewarding millions of acres of Western rangeland. And the key thing to point out is that the area we're grazing here in the West would not be used for any other food production. It is sort of set aside for wildlife and habitat. Actually improves that wild, like the Audubon Society and the Nature Conservancy are looking to partner with regenerative grass-fed ranchers and act for the future generations. Everything you do, you should have the 7 generations into the future. And the one thing I like to say is, don't try to tame the wild, tend to the wild. So thank you very much. And so you're just
Thank you so much, Doniga. That was fascinating and really interesting to hear about how the way livestock moves across the land mimics wild animals, and how that creates complexity and lots of different habitats. There's a really beautiful film to finish on at the end as well. And amazing, those mountain lion footprints and tracking wolves. I guess all of that is testament to how rich your ranch is for wildlife as well as livestock. Just before we move on to Will, I'm just going to put one question to Doniga from Jane. She asks, the chickens look free range. Is that so? Is it their laying or roosting house that's being moved around? And if so, do they adjust well to that daily move of their house?
Yeah, so basically the way we set up chickens is we do the netting, and the netting's and we have pasture shelters where they are free range. However, they pasture shelters that are and their feeders, and every chickens are able to spread around the area based on that. So they're not confined to smaller areas.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that, Doniga, and thanks again for your presentation. Let's move on to Will now, who's going to he's got a 15-minute presentation as well.
Good. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Phoebe. I'm White Oak Pastures is our multi-generational, multi-species, vertically integrated pasture-raised operation in Georgia. I really enjoyed Doniga's comments, and especially the fact that the fundamentals of what she does in California are so similar to what we do in Georgia. You know, my farm from her ranch is over 2,000 miles. I probably get 6 or 7 times as much precipitation per year, and it comes in a very different rainfall pattern. The soil is very different, but we're raising generally the same species, and all the fundamentals that she discussed are the same fundamentals that we do. So I'm struck with that, and I know of her operation, and it makes me feel like we're doing something right. Jenny will start with. So White Oak Pastures is, again, our family farm. I am the 4th generation of my family to manage this farm. My daughter, who's helping me with the technical side here, is the 5th, and she's got a son who is the 6th generation. Today we pasture raise 5 different red meat species: cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and we hand butcher them in a USDA inspected red meat slaughterhouse that I built here on the farm about 12 years ago. We pasture raise 5 different poultry species: chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks, and we hand butcher them in a separate USDA inspected slaughterhouse that I built in 2010. We also raise pastured eggs, certified organic vegetables, honey, and have a number of little bitty ancillary businesses that utilize the abundance that our farm presents to us. The farm is the home farm here where I am is 3,200 acres, and it's divided up into 100 and something 30-ish acre paddocks. And like Doniga, we move our animals every day. It's multi-species integrated in the pastures, so we have sheep and chickens in the same pastures, and they pass and repass and come and go. The other farm is one that we don't own. It's a 1,425 acre solar voltaic array about 6 miles from here. And we have a contract with that solar provider, Silicon Ranch, and we graze sheep to handle the vegetation control. We also have poultry on that farm, trying to improve the soil. It's a recent construction site, so the soil is highly degraded, needs a lot of improvement. We move those animals throughout that 1,425 acres with poly wire. There's a little over 2,000 sheep down there managing that vegetation. I guess the thing that I enjoy most about our farm is how in the 150 something years that my family has owned the farm, it's come full cycle. My great grandfather came here in 1866, and most of what we know about the way he farmed is anecdotal, but it would have been a mixed species, multi-species farm, vertically integrated, and they slaughtered animals here on the farm. And then my grandfather farmed the same way. My father was running the farm in the post-World War II era. He was born in 1920, so post-World War II, he would have been in his mid-20s. And his generation really changed agriculture dramatically. We could talk about it all day, but the changes were sweeping. The changes were needed. Europe was starving post-World War II. And the World War II innovations, the financial resources that had been spent on the war effort were repurposed. And my father's generation, for the changes were industrialized, commoditized, and centralized. And it was done to make food cheap and abundant and safe. And it was wildly successful. It made food obscenely cheap, wastefully abundant, and boringly consistent. And he ran the farm in that amount. It became a monoculture of only cattle. We had a feedlot. We used a lot of chemical fertilizer, a lot of pesticide, a lot of subtherapeutic antibiotics, a lot of hormone implants, ionophores, whatever tools were available to increase production. He ran the farm that way during his watch. I went to the University of Georgia, graduated from the College of Agriculture in 1976. I came home and further industrialized the farm. It was a very linear operation as opposed to cyclical. We built a lot of efficiencies at the expense of resilience, but it was profitable. We made money every year. And I ran the farm that way from the mid-70s to the mid-90s. And then I started to change things. I had become increasingly dissatisfied with the excesses of my production system. It was still profitable, but it just wasn't much fun anymore. So I started changing the way I run the farm. I gave up confinement feeding, the subtherapeutic antibiotics, the hormone implants that I used on the animals. I later gave up the chemical fertilizers, the pesticides, the tillage that I used in the fields to grow feed for the cattle. And I really liked what I was doing a lot better. I did it very gradually. I didn't do it all at one time. There was no renaissance, no revolution, just a gradual change. And I was still profitable, but I was not making as much money as I had previously. I was putting value into the product I was producing, but I wasn't able to extract it back from the commodity market. That caused me to build the USDA slaughterhouses that I mentioned earlier in my introduction. And that allowed me to make the products I was producing monetizable. By that time, I'd added other species beyond the monoculture of cattle. And people don't buy, consumers don't buy cows and hogs and sheep. They buy beef and pork and lamb. And since I was not able to extract the added value of my cost of production from the commodity market, we had to create a brand, and the brand was the farm, White Oak Pastures. And we started producing and selling direct to consumers. We also sold to wholesale grocery, Whole Foods Market, Publix, Kroger, food service companies like US Foods, Cisco, others. And we operated the farm that way. My daughters, 2 of my 3 daughters elected to come back to the farm. They didn't have to. In fact, I wouldn't let them for the first year. I made them go somewhere to work for somebody else. But they ultimately did come back, and they brought spouses with them. So I've got 2 children and 2 in-laws working here. And between those 2 couples, they've got 3 grandbabies. That's the 6th generation I mentioned earlier. So we ran the farm as a pretty vertically integrated operation, right up to the end. At the end, it was business to business, us to big grocery and big food service. And that worked for us for a long time. But more recently, due to primarily to the greenwashing of products by big major ag companies, our margins have crunched, and that's forced us to develop our online store, online marketing. We built an order fulfillment center here on the farm. So it's quite likely that you can buy a pork chop from us that several generations of those hogs were born on this farm. They were slaughtered on this farm. We pack it and ship it to you through FedEx or UPS from this farm. So it's a business model that's working very well for us. It's also working very well for the community. My farm, the little incorporated town of Bluffton, Georgia. It's an incorporated city, population 102, happens to sit right in the middle of my farm. And the city is benefiting from what we've done. When I was farming industrially in the early 90s, I had 3 or 4 employees selling a little over $1 million worth of live cattle a year. Today, we've got 176 employees. We're the largest private employer in the county, and the payroll's over $100,000 a week. And that's Bluffton is located in the poorest county in one of the poorest states in the union. So the economic impact is very significant, and we're very proud of that. You know, the changes that we made to the land and then the animals, the production model was very, very intentional. We wanted to make some changes. We studied the system. We implemented new methods. Some of them didn't work. We implemented another new method. But the improvement we made to the city, to the economy here, was very unintentional. We never said, I believe we can revitalize this little ghost town. That never happened. What happened was when we changed the way we farm, we attracted all these young, passionate people that wanted to come here and work and learn. And they needed a place to eat, a place to sleep, a place to drink, a place to play. And we provided it. All of a sudden, we've got a very, very nice little town again. And we're very proud of that. You know, I would like to say that we have really led the way with a bunch of other people in my neighborhood changing, but that's not the case. The case is that other farmers have not changed much. This is still an area that's dominates a purely agrarian economy, and it's dominated by the monocultural production in rotation of corn, cotton, peanuts. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not trying to get people to change the way they farm. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing, although we have decided that the educational component is important to us and should become more important to us. And we've implemented an internship program that has turned out to be just a delight for us. We've attracted a lot of really fine young people. So I had one intern that was 66, same age as me. But generally young people, and a lot of them have chosen to stay here. Others have chosen to go on in agriculture. We're going to be expanding that. We're going to do more and more training here. Again, not to evangelize, not to try to talk people into doing it different, but to share the things we've learned over the last 25 years. I try not to plow the same ground Doniga did, because our stories are, from the fundamental perspective, are so similar. But I would direct you, I was impressed with what she said about improving the soil. And I would urge you to look at our website, whiteoakpastures.com, under the land stewardship section. There you'll find a third-party LCA, life cycle assessment, that was done by an environmental engineering group from Minnesota a couple of years ago. And it shows that over the 20, 25 years that we've been managing our land differently with animal impact and more holistically, the organic matter has gone from about 0.5% to 5%. But we're very proud of that, and I would direct you to have a look at that. You might find it interesting. I think my time's up. I've enjoyed talking to you, and thank you again for having me on the program today.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Will. That's a really interesting presentation and great to see all those pictures as well of the animals on the farm. I was interested to hear about the way you regenerated your farm, kind of regenerated the whole town. And I thought in terms of you making a change to becoming a regenerative farmer, you spoke about the importance of selling direct to consumers, building the brand, wondered what kind of key advice or key things that you think people should avoid if they're considering making this very significant transition to becoming a regenerative farmer. And one more question I also had was, what advice would you give to farmers in the UK who don't have as much land? You know, you have thousands of acres. People in the UK have hundreds or maybe even tens of acres. What advice would you give them?
Well, to answer the first question first, things to avoid. I've seen the people, the farmers I've seen start down this road to a kinder, gentler agriculture, more regenerative, more humane, really focused exclusively on the production side and didn't seem to put the resources into the processing and marketing that's necessary. I mentioned in my talk, you monetize what consumers want to buy, and you can do the best job in the world producing it. And if you can't extract the value back from the marketplace, then you'll go broke. So the production side is the fun part that we all want to do. We all enjoy getting out there and trying new things, and that's important. It's necessary, but an equal amount of time and effort's got to be put into the processing, which is making it monetizable, and the sales, marketing, distribution side, which is extracting the actual cash back into the system to pay your bills. Your second comment question was regarding the size, scope, England versus the United States, the area of land available. And in my opinion, there's really no proper scale that you've got to be on. Unlike industrial farming, it's not linear. It's not so highly scalable. It's highly replicatable. It's very cyclical. So what's important is for the farmer to be sure that it's sized appropriately. I mentioned earlier, I'm in one of the poorest counties in one of the poorest states in the country, and I'm not near my market. I'm a long way from my market. So I've got to operate at a greater scale so I can handle the logistics of getting it to where the people that want to buy it. The good news is where I am, land is cheap, so you can operate at a bigger scale. I know very successful operations that have tiny little land areas, but they're right near a really great market. So the fundamentals are, keep in mind that there's production, processing, and marketing. And it's not how long those three legs are on the stool. It's that all the three legs are the same length, so the stool doesn't topple over.
Okay, that relates to a question, interesting question we've had in from someone watching, which is, I guess to both of you, what kind of leadership skills do young people need to make the kind of changes to land management that you've both outlined today?
Doniga, you want to do that? You want me to? So,
Okay.
Ladies first.
Thank you, Will. This is fun. The whole virtual thing is, yeah, when you're out in a rural area, I apologize for the internet. I even upgraded this morning so this wouldn't happen. So, I think number one, you need the drive and the passion because like Will, we didn't start out saying, okay, we're going to transition to make more money. Like that wasn't really in our frame of reference whatsoever. We had the passion to do something that was against the grain, that was good for the animals, that was good for the environment and good for our community. So number one, you need that drive inside to really step out and take the risks and make a change, and to sort of risk losing it all and kind of put yourself out there. And then I think from there, you just pick up tools along the way. And the number one is to really connect with nature and knowledge of place, because when you look back to the roots of permaculture and the roots of holistic management and the roots of regenerative agriculture, with of how nature functions, it's not going to work. So I think that we do need to scale this up, but we also need to be smart and to realize there's people behind all of these farms, and there's families, and we really need to work and empower the farmers and ranchers to be the leaders and to be doing the education. So, yeah.
Will, anything to add to that?
I think that was well done. I would say that that if you're a transitioning farmer like I was, the striking difference between cyclical and linear, the striking distance between complicated and complex, the striking distance between the difference between resilient and efficient. The holistic way that we farm is cyclical, resilient, and complex versus the other three adjectives in the industrial market, in the industrial production model. And if you, like me, had a land grant college education where you learn the industrial methods and then you practiced it from 20 years, which I did, and you had a father who was very linear, Western, then it's quite the transition. And until you get your head around that, it's probably not going to work very well for you.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you both. And we have another question, which is for Will. Do you have capacity to grow, or have you reached a sweet spot to keep volumes as they are? I'm guessing in terms of the amount of livestock you have on your land, as presumably your land has become more fertile, having had chemicals on it for decades and lost its fertility. It's presumably sporting more livestock than it was initially.
That's a very good question. And the answer is, as I said, it's not linear, so it's not fully scalable. There's a stopping point, and we are probably at that stopping point with the existing land that we have. One complicating factor is we spent $7.5 million building processing plants, because that's how big I built the smallest ones I could. That's just how big they had to be to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. That requires a certain number of animals going through, and we have handled that through our producer group. We have maxed out our red meat animal slaughterhouse. We will not be adding to it. We're at the end of that rope. We're as big as we need to be, scaled up as far as we need to scale up. We will continue to add land until we can displace the producer group. Our goal is to have a single estate product, everything born, raised right here on White Oak Pastures. I want multi-generational animals just like I am. I'm multi-generational.
And in terms of in the years after you started the transition, how could your land support less animals because it was kind of the fertility was lower? When did you sort of see that curve change?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So when I cold turkey went off of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and it was very sobering. The land was just wouldn't produce. I mean, there's no microbial activity. There's a 0.5% organic matter. The bulk density was very tight. It was just a very poor growing medium, and I'm sure it started improving almost immediately, but it took a couple of years before I could recognize it. And as the LCA pointed out, it took 20 years to increase the organic matter to 5%. Now, that's the true answer and detailed answer to the question. But now the fact is, I'm not able to grow any more animals on this farm today than I did when I was using 300 pounds of elemental nitrogen per acre fertilizer twice a year. We were pouring the fertilizer to the land, producing copious amounts of feed at the expense of the land. And probably the feed wasn't that good, but that's what commodity agriculture is. So you produce, the sad side that none of us in regenerative agriculture wants to admit is we produce less food per acre when we give up those tools that reductionist science gave us to increase production. And we do it a whole lot better. There's a lot of offsets to that. The climate's better, the water's better, the feed is better, the animals are better, ... But as far as actual calories per acre or grams of protein per acre, when you use the industrial tools for production, you grow copious quantities of food. It comes at a great cost to the environment, but you grow a lot of it.
Yeah, and just to add to that land use, many of the places where we're going into are marginal lands. Like Will is farming under a photovoltaic array. We're ranching in places where there was no food being grown. And I think, as a whole, we need to, not look at, how many acres does it take to produce a grass-fed and finished steer versus a feedlot steer. We need to look at how much life are we producing by each life that is taken, and like that life in the soil and that habitat for those threatened grassland birds. And we need to put that value on those ecosystem services that we're seeing as a result of humans tending to nature and producing food in a way that enhances life. And also not just leave it up to the farmers to grow all the food. Cities can be growing, you can be growing all of your produce. You don't need to depend on farmers to grow your produce. Yes, the large scale proteins, you need us to grow that for you. But we need to look at all the land available as a whole, and not just say it takes this many acres to do it regeneratively versus industrial. That's very reductionist thinking that we need to really move away from.
Great, thank you. And another question from Maria, which congratulations for your work. How do you treat your animals? Is it necessary, or maybe do they have less problems on your regenerative farm, on your regenerative farms?
I'll take that one. So go ahead.
You crack on.
So when I never thought that I was not being humane and kind to my animals. When I was at my most industrial, I still thought my animal handling was humane. If you told me it wasn't, I would have spanked you. But it wasn't. In my mind, in that era, good animal welfare meant you keep them well fed, you keep them well watered, you keep them in a comfortable temperature range, and you don't intentionally inflict pain and suffering. And if you hit those boxes, that's good animal welfare, except it's not. It's also incumbent upon the herdsman to create an environment in which the animal can express instinctive behavior. And the sort of industrial confinement agriculture that I used to practice did not accommodate that. I like to say that cows were born to roam and graze, hogs were born to root and wallow, chickens were born to scratch and peck. And those are instinctive behaviors. And if we, as stewards of these animals, don't allow that instinctive behavior, we are creating a stress, a low-level stress, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the entire life of that animal. So that is the missing component in what animal welfare is in a confinement CAFO type operation. Of course, we could also get into the multi-species segment. But if you do raise animals, allowing them to express instinctive behavior, and you do allow for the symbiosis that comes from having multi-species living together, then you find you'll have a lot less, that stress will go away and you'll have a lot less health problems with your animals.
And lower vets bills.
Yes.
Yeah. Doniga, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, great. This is an interesting question. Do you feel the country's political environment is becoming more conducive to this approach? Have national policies been enabling for you, or have you just done it despite the political environment? Are you part of any advocacy groups that build political power and advocate for this approach? Doniga, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Government's too slow, and you really have to do it from the grassroots level and the individual family level. So no, we haven't waited around for any policies to change. We've sort of breaking all the molds and all the rules, and just sort of gone at it, from our own values. And I think that what the government does do is really put farmers in a box where they're trapped. And in between California and Georgia, where Will is, there's that whole space of the US in between that is really caught in this trap. And we have a lot of work to do because rural America is hurting. The towns are being boarded up. The schools are being shut down. The only things that are thriving are where the corn and soy gets dropped off at the mill and where the farmers pick up the chemicals. So, and if farmers are on the brink of suicide. So there's a lot of work to be done in between these two posts. And I'm definitely a part of a number of advocacy groups, and I do education across the world. And I like to work directly with that farmer. I like to sit across their kitchen table. I think that's the most effective because there's not sort of a broad approach to this. Every region is different. Every individual is different. Every challenge and opportunity. That's what it's going to take, is us to really sit across the table with every single farmer or rancher and figure out what it's going to take. And it's not just about the survival of their farm. It's about the survival of all of us.
Mm. Will, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, to address the question of the national policies, sadly, I don't think we'll ever see any meaningful change come from our federal or state government. I think that the politicians are controlled by the lobbyists, and the lobbyists are controlled by the large multinational pharmaceutical companies, food companies, farming companies, So I don't think we'll ever see meaningful change, whether it's Republican or Democrat. I think we're going to have to do it in spite of, not as a result of.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we've got 4 minutes left on this link, and then if Doniga and Will are happy to hang around for another half an hour, we've got a few more questions to get through. So we'll then pop over to the Zoom link. So I think that's going to be post soon. So if you just click on that and then we'll move over. I'm just going to squeeze in one more question in the last 4 minutes. So quick answers for this one. It's about carbon auditing of your farm. Do you do any carbon audits of your farm, and if so, does that change your practice at all?
We have the LCA life cycle assessment that I referenced, and it was paid for by a customer, very expensive, paid for by a customer, and led to just so much bickering between scientists about the methods of measuring that that's just that's beneath me. I know we sequester carbon on this farm. I can look at it. I mean, I can take a soil sample in my hands from my side of the fence and my neighbor's side of the fence, and it looks like it came from 2 different planets. I personally don't need the assessments to tell that we're doing what we're supposed to do. And I realize that the greater good needs those assessments, but I do get tired of the incessant bickering that comes from one scientist. I think that Doniga and I and others have become very skilled at sequestering carbon. We know how to do that. I can show you. Come see me, I'll show you. I don't think that science has yet learned how to measure it. And I sure get tired of that bickering. It sickens me.
Doniga, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that we really need more common sense in the world. I think this is what sort of Will is referring to, is that it's pretty obvious when you journey to the source of your food, and that was one of the steps that I outlined, and you connect with that place with all of your senses, you can understand how much life and how much carbon is being sequestered. And the potential is huge. And, for us to sort of bicker back and forth about the science and the methods, we don't have time for that. We just need to produce more life. We need to sequester more carbon. We need more people out on the land, taking their place as stewards of the land. And if we wait around for science, if we wait around for government, it might already be too late. The rest of my life fighting for this and working to sequester as much carbon as I possibly can in my short little time on this incredible planet.
And the other negative that comes from this incessant search of how much carbon we're sequestering carbon is important. It's not the only thing that we do. I mean, there's so many other benefits beyond just carbon. We talk on and on and on ad nauseum about carbon and how much and how many carbon dioxide equivalents per whatever. And what about the water? What about the diversity? What about just on and on, so many, the economic impact that I mentioned earlier. What about how much better the food is? There's so many things that are distracted from by too much focus on one of the benefits of what we do.
Okay, great. Thank you both. So we're just about to run out of time on this, so please click on the Zoom link, and we're going to carry on this chat in another window. And yeah, so hopefully see you shortly. And thanks very much to everyone for tuning in and listening.